Hi, I'm Ruby. My family laughed when I showed up at my brother's wedding, but that was before I exposed the truth they've kept hidden for years. Imagine the shock on their faces when I revealed my father's second family. They thought they had control over me, but I was done playing their game. What happened next? Let me tell you, it was a moment they'll never forget. Hook 2. At my brother's wedding, my dad laughed at me. He thought I didn't know, but I knew everything. The lies, the secrets, the second family. I could have stayed silent, but I didn't. Instead, I did the one thing that shattered everything. I exposed him. The family tried to control me for years, but that day, it all fell apart. You won't believe what happened after that. Combined. Hook. Hi, I'm Ruby. At my brother's wedding, my dad laughed when I showed up. Little did he know, I wasn't just there to witness the celebration. I had a secret, one that would destroy everything he built. My father had a second family. The lies he'd buried so deep, I exposed them all. What happened after? Chaos. The family couldn't believe it, but that was just the beginning of the battle I was ready to fight. Stay tuned, because you won't believe how this ends. The sun was beginning to dip behind the clouds as I arrived at my brother's wedding. The grand estate loomed in front of me, the kind of place that screamed wealth and high society. Guests were already mingling, their laughter and chatter floating through the air like music. I stood at the entrance for a moment, taking in the scene. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but I couldn't help but feel like an outsider. I walked in alone. The silence around me felt almost deafening. No one bothered to ask why I had come alone. They didn't need to. The absence of a date was enough to make them whisper. I had always been the invisible one in the family, but today felt different. Something was bubbling beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite name, but I felt it in every nerve. The moment I stepped into the grand hall, all eyes turned toward me. I could feel the judgment in the air. A flicker of discomfort twisted inside me, but I kept my face neutral, eyes forward. I'm used to this, I whispered to myself, but today feels different. The first laugh came from my father, his voice booming across the room. She couldn't even get a date, he said, his words cutting through the noise, and just like that, the laughter followed. I kept walking, my face set in stone, though every word seemed to land like a slap. I hated him for it. I hated how easily he could humiliate me, how he always found a way to make me feel small. But I couldn't show it. Not here. Not now. The sting of his words sank deep into my chest, but I pushed it down. I wouldn't let them see me flinch, not this time. I sat at the back of the room, my gaze fixed on the wedding, the vows, the smiles, the happiness of everyone around me, so starkly different from the emptiness that gnawed at my insides. I was a shadow in my own family, a placeholder, a nobody. And yet, the deeper I sat in my own thoughts, the more I felt a quiet rage bubbling to the surface. They'd always looked down on me. But this moment was going to be different. I could feel it. I wouldn't let them get away with it any longer. Then, it happened. Without warning, my father grabbed my arm, yanking me towards the fountain. The laughter around us grew louder, and before I could react, he shoved me into the cold water. The guests clapped, their hands ringing out like an applause for the cruelest act. My clothes were drenched, the cold water soaking into my skin. I stood there stunned, my body trembling not from the chill, but from the sheer humiliation. I looked up to see my father's face twisted in satisfaction. "Don't forget this moment," he sneered. His words cut through me like a knife, each one a reminder that I was nothing more than the family's joke. And they all laughed. They laughed like it was nothing, as if I was nothing. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and did nothing. I didn't scream, I didn't fight back, because I knew it wouldn't matter. But something inside me shifted. The line had been crossed. I had been broken so many times before, but this time felt different. This time, I wouldn't stay silent. I wouldn't let them win. My thoughts raced, but I kept my face blank. I knew what they were expecting. They were expecting me to crumble, but I wouldn't. Not this time. I wiped the water from my face, straightening my back, and forced a small smile. A smile that no one expected. A smile that surprised even myself. As I did, I heard a murmur from the crowd. They were watching me now, watching closely. I whispered under my breath, "Don't forget this moment." And though the words were soft, I knew they were the beginning of something new. Something that would change everything. Just as I thought I could finally breathe, something caught my eye. A car. A luxury car pulling up to the entrance. The crowd parted as a man stepped out. His calm, controlled movements were like something out of a dream. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was before he even reached me. And just like that, everything changed. The room fell silent. Every head turned, and every face paled in recognition. I could see the shock in their eyes, the realization of who he was. And that was when I knew. This wedding had just become my stage. I wasn't going to be the invisible one anymore. I reached for his hand, feeling a strange sense of power surge through me. His touch grounded me in a way nothing else ever had. I held my head high. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The evening had taken on a different energy. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter filled the lavish estate as the wedding reception unfolded. I stood near the edge of the grand dining hall, my clothes still damp from the fountain incident. But something inside me had changed. The sting of humiliation had been replaced with a cool determination. My husband's arrival had disrupted the static air. As the guests turned to look at him, I couldn't help but notice their stunned faces. My father's expression was the most telling. His eyes widened when he saw who was walking toward me, and I felt a small but triumphant smile tug at my lips. I hadn't expected such a reaction, but there it was. My presence was finally being acknowledged, and not as the family's shameful daughter. The shift was palpable. I had always been the one left behind, overlooked, dismissed. But now, standing beside my husband, I was no longer invisible. The weight of the years of neglect seemed to dissolve in the air, replaced with something far more powerful: control. Ruby's thoughts lingered on her father's discomfort. I can see it in his eyes now. The realization that I'm no longer the underdog, the one he could toss aside when it suited him. His jaw clenched, and for a split second, I saw something in his gaze, something that felt almost like fear. As my husband approached, the silence grew heavier. The guests shifted uneasily, the atmosphere suddenly thick with tension. There was no longer any doubt. My father was losing his grip on the situation. My husband stopped beside me, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos I had just endured. He wasn't fazed by the sudden change in the room's energy, nor by the curious eyes that scrutinized him. He looked at me, and I could see the quiet confidence in his eyes, the kind of confidence that would make anyone hesitate before challenging him. I caught my father's gaze, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of realization. He understood. This wasn't just a man I had married. This was someone who held power. And that power was now standing at my side, a force to be reckoned with. Ruby's internal monologue. This isn't just about the wedding anymore. This is about reclaiming control. My father stammered, trying to regain his composure, but it was clear his control was slipping. He attempted a half-hearted comment to break the tension. "Well, I see someone's managed to land herself a rich husband," he sneered, trying to act as though he hadn't just been rattled. But before he could continue, my husband spoke, cutting through the nonsense with a calm voice that made the entire room pause. "I think we've all been avoiding the truth for far too long," he said, his words clear and direct. The silence was deafening. The guests were no longer laughing. Their chatter died down, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Even my father seemed to falter, his attempt at command disintegrating in the face of my husband's declaration. There was no turning back now. Ruby felt the weight of her husband's words sink in. He knows exactly what he's doing, she thought, watching her father's face twist in frustration. I could feel the power shifting. The balance was tipping, and my father's anger was becoming more visible. The way he stood there, fumbling for the right words, was a clear indication that he knew he had lost control. The tension in the room thickened, but I wasn't about to let it slip away. This was my moment. I stepped away from my husband's side for a moment, glancing at my father. This was no longer just about me being the dutiful daughter. This was about setting the record straight. For all the years of silence, for all the times I had been made to feel small, this moment would mark the beginning of my taking back control. In the quiet of the corner, I caught my father's eye once again. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in that single moment. "I know what you've been hiding," I said softly, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "And tonight, it ends. You can't keep playing the same games with me anymore." I could see the flash of panic in his eyes. He wasn't prepared for this. For years, he had thought he could keep me beneath his thumb. But tonight, I was showing him just how wrong he was. Ruby's thoughts were clear. "I've been silent for far too long. It's time to expose the truth." I could almost hear my father's heart pounding in his chest as he tried to maintain his composure. For a moment, he said nothing. His silence was the calm before the storm. But when he did speak, it was laced with anger. "You're making a mistake. Do you really think you can win this?" His words felt like a challenge, and I was ready to rise to it. But I wasn't trying to win. I wasn't trying to beat him. Well, I was simply trying to make sure everyone else could see him for who he truly was. The truth was more powerful than any victory I could ever claim. "I wasn't trying to win," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I was just trying to show you the truth. But now, I'll let everyone see it for themselves." The guests began to whisper, and the energy in the room shifted once more. My father's attempt at control had failed. Now it was time for the real drama to unfold. I walked through the quiet corridors of the family estate, each step echoing in the hollow silence. The wedding was over. The guests had left, their laughter and chatter replaced by the heavy, oppressive silence that now seemed to cling to the walls. I was alone for the moment, alone with my thoughts, alone with the storm that had just begun to brew. The air around me felt thick. It wasn't the usual weight of familial expectations. It was something else. A silence that screamed louder than words ever could. The quiet before the storm. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Ruby's thoughts. It's not just about exposing him anymore. It's about reclaiming what's mine, piece by piece. I paused in front of a mirror as I walked past, taking a moment to collect myself. My hair was still slightly damp from the fountain, but I didn't care. The water didn't matter anymore. I had long since learned to embrace the discomfort of my life. In my eyes met my reflection, but instead of the usual uncertainty, I saw someone new, someone who knew exactly what she wanted. I thought back to my childhood, the moments when I was always the last one picked, the one who never mattered. The quiet, dismissive glances from my father, the way he always chose my brother over me. But now, I had the upper hand. He wouldn't see it coming. No one would. Ruby's thoughts lingered on her father's actions, the years of dismissiveness that had left their scars. All my life I was invisible. but not tonight. Not anymore. I stood there for a few seconds, letting the memory settle deep within me. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was resolved, and that resolve was the most dangerous thing I had. The door behind me opened, and I heard my father's voice before I even saw him. His words were calm, but there was an unmistakable tension beneath them. "We need to talk." The room was small, dimly lit, and the air felt colder than it had a moment ago. My father stood in the doorway, trying to appear composed, but I could see the way his shoulders were hunched, the way his eyes shifted nervously. He had been caught off guard. The power was no longer his. Ruby's thoughts. He thinks he can control me, but I'm not the same person I was before. "Come in, father," I said, my voice steady but edged with something darker. "We're already talking, aren't we?" He stepped in, and the door clicked shut behind him. His eyes scanned the room briefly before resting on me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of how to proceed. He had always thought he could talk his way out of anything. He wasn't so sure anymore. I watched him for a long moment, silently calculating my next move. I had prepared for this. I'd spent years thinking about what I would say, how I would say it. But in this moment, it wasn't about the words. It was about the truth he had been hiding for so long. He cleared his throat and tried again. This isn't how it's supposed to go, Ruby. I don't know what you're trying to do, but—" I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "You don't know what I'm trying to do. You've been doing it to me for years. All I'm doing is finally standing up for myself." His face reddened, and I saw the flicker of anger in his eyes. He was trying to keep it under control, but I knew him too well. He was slipping, and I was enjoying every second of it. "I'm not some child you can bully into silence anymore," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I'm done being the family's secret, the embarrassment. I'm done being the one who's always overlooked. And you're done pretending." Ruby's thoughts. "You've manipulated everything, haven't you, Father? You've lied to everyone. But I'm done. I won't let it slide anymore." There was a long pause, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He wasn't used to me standing up to him like this. He had always been able to dismiss me, brush me off like a small annoyance. But now, I was the one in control, and he knew it. His voice trembled when he spoke next. "You think you can expose me? You have no idea what you're doing." I took a step closer, my eyes never leaving his. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I have the proof. And tonight, it ends." The words hung in the air between us. He could see it now. There was no running from the truth. Before he could respond, I turned to my husband, who had been silently watching the exchange from the corner of the room. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his presence behind me, like a quiet assurance that everything would unfold just as we'd planned. I knew the next words were going to sting him the most. He'd tried to maintain his control over everything, over me, over the family. But that was no longer the case, Ruby's thoughts. This is it. This is where everything changes. There's no going back. I moved toward the table, where I had left a folder I'd carefully prepared. I opened it slowly, watching my father's eyes narrow. I knew he was realizing what was coming. He could feel the shift. I pulled out a photograph, one I had managed to get my hands on just days earlier. It was a picture of my father with another family, his second family, the one he'd been hiding for years. "Here it is," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Proof. You can't lie your way out of this anymore, Father." He froze. His face went pale as he stared at the photograph, his mouth slightly open, like he was searching for the right words that would never come. The tension in the room was suffocating. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He couldn't speak. He had no defense. The family's walls were crumbling. I walked up to him slowly, my eyes never leaving his. Now let's see if you can lie your way out of this one, Father." The morning after the storm had passed, the family estate felt quieter than ever. The once lively halls now felt cold and empty, a stark contrast to the energy of the night before. I woke up with a sense of purpose, the lingering emotions from the previous night still swirling inside me. I could hear the faint sound of birds outside, a peaceful morning for the world. But inside, a war was brewing. My father had always been the pillar of this family, but the cracks were undeniable now. The lies he had built his life on were slowly crumbling, and I was the one who would bring it all to light. Ruby's thoughts. I've been silent for far too long, but today, I speak. I'll make sure everyone knows who I really am. I remembered the countless times he had made me feel small, ignored, belittled, and made to feel invisible. Each memory now fueled the fire inside me. The morning light felt different today, as if it was illuminating the path I needed to take. I wasn't sure what to expect from the rest of the family. Some of them, I knew, would defend him. But others might finally see the truth. This was no longer just about me and my father. It was about everything he had hidden. The time for silence was over. Ruby's mind drifted back to a specific moment in time, one that defined everything about her relationship with her father. She remembered a family trip when she was a little girl, how she had stood in front of her father, hoping for a simple acknowledgement, but he had passed her by without a second glance. You were always invisible to him, Ruby thought. But not anymore. I walked slowly to the dining room, where the rest of the family had gathered. The tension in the air was palpable. My father sat at the head of the table, his usual air of command slipping away. He was trying to regain control of the situation, but he knew, deep down, that the walls were closing in. Ruby's father. We need to keep calm. This will pass. We can move on from this. His words hung in the air, but there was no conviction behind them. The power he once held so firmly was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Still, he tried. He always tried. Ruby's father. Ruby's just upset. She's misinterpreting things. You all know how she is. I could hear his words, but I wasn't fazed. They didn't hold the weight they once did. I watched the family, their eyes darting between my father and me, uncertain. I could feel the dissonance growing, the divide between the truth and the lies expanding. Twist S2. My mother, who had remained silent for years, finally spoke. I knew about it. I've always known, but I didn't have the strength to say anything. I was afraid. Her voice cracked with the weight of years of silence, and in that moment, I saw everything. My father's web of lies wasn't just about him, it was about all of us. My mother's admission broke something inside me. It was a shift I had been waiting for. Her fear had kept her quiet for so long, but now, she was speaking the truth. Emotional tone. A cold silence filled the room. There was a shift, a crack in the family's carefully constructed facade. My father's attempts to maintain control were becoming more desperate. I looked at my mother, then back at my father. It's time to end this, I thought. Time to expose him for what he really is. I took a deep breath and spoke calmly, my voice carrying across the room. You've built your entire life on lies, Father. But it's over now. It's time for the truth to come out. Twist S3. I wasn't done yet. I reached for the folder I had been carefully hiding, the one I knew would change everything. I opened it slowly, each action deliberate. Inside was the final piece of the puzzle, a video recording of my father with his second family. It wasn't just proof, it was the final blow. I held it up, watching my father's eyes widen in shock. This is the end of the story, I said. You don't get to control this family anymore. Ruby's father froze. His lips parted, but the words that would have once come so easily to him, lies, excuses, didn't come. Instead, he stared at the video, his expression unreadable. The room went silent. The truth was finally here. Ruby's thoughts. He thought he could control us. But now, the truth is out, and it's not going away. I could see the shifting allegiances in the room. Some family members, still loyal to my father, couldn't bring themselves to accept what was happening. But there were others, my brother and aunt, who looked at the video and then at my father with an expression I had never seen before. They were processing it, slowly, but they were starting to see what had been hidden for so long. Emotional tone. There was a mixture of disbelief, anger, and betrayal in the room. The realization was dawning on everyone. The lies, the manipulation, it was all out in the open now. Twist S4, then my brother, the golden child of the family, spoke up. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. I suspected something for a while, but I didn't know how to confront it. I didn't want to lose everything. His words shifted the atmosphere. He had been a part of the lie, but his quiet admission made him more than just a bystander. It made him a part of the truth now. The air was thick with emotion as the room began to stir. Some family members were still in shock, but others were beginning to process the weight of everything that had been revealed. Ruby's husband remained quiet, his presence still a steadying force in the background, but his eyes never left me. He was here for this moment, and I felt his support. I turned my attention back to my father. He was still reeling, his face pale, unable to speak. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I asked, my voice low but clear. "Do you want to explain how you thought you could get away with this?" Twist S5. My father's hands trembled as he reached for his glass of water. He tried to gather himself, but the defeat was already written across his face. Cliffhanger line. "It's over. You've lost everything. And now you'll have to live with the consequences of your lies." The sun was beginning to set as I paced the halls of the family home, each step filled with purpose. The weight of what was to come hung heavy in the air. I could hear my father downstairs, trying to hold it all together, but I knew the truth had already cracked the foundation. I had spent years waiting for this moment, and now I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. Ruby's thoughts. I won't let him walk away unscathed. It's time the truth comes out. I could feel the tension bubbling up inside me. Last night had been the first step in a long journey, but this was the moment where I took control. I wasn't just going to confront him, I was going to shatter the lies that had kept me in the shadows for so long. I stood in front of the mirror, steadying myself. It was a strange feeling, being calm, but underneath, a fire was burning. I had everything I needed now. The letter, the proof, the years of pain and neglect, all boiled down to this one confrontation. Twist S1. As I was about to leave my room, I noticed an old letter tucked away in a drawer, one I hadn't seen before. It was from years ago, written by my mother. The words on the page confirmed something I had always suspected, but never had the proof to back up. My father's betrayal ran deeper than I had realized. This letter was the last piece of the puzzle. I tucked it into my pocket, knowing it would be the final blow. The family gathered in the dining room, the weight of the silence pressing down on everyone. The air felt thick with tension as I entered, my father already sitting at the table, his hands gripping the edges tightly. He was trying to maintain control, his eyes flicking nervously toward me, but I could see the cracks in his facade. Ruby's thoughts. It's not going to be easy, but it doesn't matter anymore. I'm doing this for me, for everyone he's hurt. I took a deep breath, then spoke. We need to talk. Ruby's father tried to hide his discomfort, attempting to remain calm. What's done is done, Ruby. Let's not make things worse than they already are. The family members, sitting around the table, exchanged looks. Some were quietly apprehensive, while others shifted uneasily in their seats. It was clear, No one knew where this conversation would lead, and none of them were prepared for the truth. Twist S2. Just as my father tried to shift the narrative, one of my siblings, looking unsure, spoke up. I've seen things, Ruby. Things I didn't want to believe. But maybe you're right. The words felt like a betrayal to my father, but they were also a form of liberation. For the first time, one of them admitted to having doubts. Emotional tone, tension filled the room as my father's face reddened with anger. He tried to brush off my sibling's admission, but the cracks were deepening. The facade he had so carefully built was crumbling, and there was no way to fix it. I looked at my father. His expression, once so powerful, was now a mask of desperation. He tried to maintain his control, but I could see the fear creeping in. It was all unraveling in front of us. He attempted to smooth things over, but the words felt hollow. He was losing his grip. Ruby's thoughts. You spent my whole life making me feel less than. Not anymore. I wasn't going to let him twist the narrative this time. The truth was out, and it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. Slowly, I pulled out the letter, placing it on the table between us. Ruby's voice was steady, cutting through the air. You thought you could control all of us with lies. But it's over. Your secrets are out. Twist S3. As expected, my father tried to explain it away, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that things weren't what they seemed, but his excuses fell apart quickly. Every word he said was met with more evidence, more facts that I had carefully gathered over the years. His defensiveness only made him look more guilty. Emotional tone. The power in my voice was undeniable. I wasn't the scared little girl anymore. I was a woman who had been pushed to her limits, and I had the truth on my side. This was my moment. Family members began reacting. Their reactions a mix of shock, disbelief, and confusion. Some of them, like my brother, were still too afraid to take a stand, unsure of what was real. But the others, the ones who had always been loyal to my father, were beginning to look at him differently. Some were beginning to understand the truth, while others refused to accept it. Ruby's thoughts. They've been living in his shadow for so long that they don't know what it's like to stand on their own. They're scared, but that's okay. I'm not scared anymore. Twist S4. Then my brother, someone I had always looked up to, the one who had always been the family's golden child, stepped forward. I always suspected something, he said quietly, but I was too afraid to speak up. I didn't know how to confront this. His admission shifted something in me. I wasn't alone in this fight. I hadn't been, but now I had the support I needed to push forward. It felt like a turning point. The tension in the room escalated as I stepped back, watching my father's face as he realized the control he once had was slipping away. He tried one final desperate attempt to regain his position. He appealed to my emotions, reminding me of everything he had done for me, but it was too late. His words meant nothing now. Ruby's voice was clear and strong as she looked at him one last time. This is your legacy now. You can't hide from the truth anymore. You've lost. Twist S5. My father, now cornered, opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. The final piece of his empire of lies had been exposed. There was nothing left for him to say. His power was gone, and he was left with the consequences of his actions. Cliffhanger line. You don't get to win this time. Not anymore. This ends today. I stood in the hallway of the family estate, watching the sun set through the tall windows. The world outside seemed calm, but inside, it was as if a storm was brewing. I had done what I thought was right. I had exposed the lies, shattered the illusions that had held my family together for far too long. But now, as I reflected on everything, I wasn't so sure. Was I any better than my father? Was this what I truly wanted? Ruby's thoughts. I've come this far, but am I becoming him? Is the vengeance I feel leading me down the same dark path? The thought gnawed at me as I paced back and forth. I had spent years trapped in his world, the one he created, where his manipulations were the currency of survival. Now that I had the power, the control, was I willing to let go of the rage that had fueled me? Or would I hold on to it, feeding it until it consumed me completely? Twist S1. I sat down at the table and found an old letter, one I hadn't seen before. It was from my mother, written years ago. Her words struck me like a knife to the chest. She had known all along about my father's deceit. She had lived with it in silence for the sake of preserving the family, but the truth was right there in black and white. And now I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about me or my father. It was about the generations of silence that had plagued our family. As I read the letter, I felt the weight of everything we had all sacrificed to maintain the facade. I took a deep breath and pushed the thoughts aside. I couldn't afford to be distracted by guilt now. The time had come to make a decision. The family gathered in the drawing room for what was supposed to be a quiet dinner, but the air was thick with uncertainty. My father tried to remain in control, sitting with his back straight, his eyes darting around the room. My siblings, for the most part, were silent, the weight of the situation hanging over them like a dark cloud. Ruby's thoughts. They can't keep pretending anymore. The truth is out, and they know it. There was an undercurrent of fear in the room. I could see it in their faces, the way they shifted uncomfortably. But I wasn't going to let this moment slip away. It was time to confront my father. For the first time, I felt calm, knowing that I had nothing left to lose. Twist S2. Just as I was about to speak, one of my siblings, a quiet but observant soul, spoke up. "I've seen it, Ruby. I never wanted to believe it, but I've seen things I can't ignore anymore. Things I wish I had told you sooner." The words hit like a bombshell. One of them, someone I had trusted, had seen the cracks long ago. They had been silent, just like the rest of us. But now, they were finally ready to acknowledge the truth. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I turned to face my father. He looked different now, the once strong patriarch now trembling in his chair. The control he'd held over us all these years was slipping away, and I could see it in his eyes. He was desperate to hold on to what little power he had left. But it was too late. The game was over. Ruby's voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of everything she had ever felt. "This is your last chance. You can't control me anymore. You're not the same man I once admired. You've destroyed everything." Twist S3. My father's face darkened as I presented the evidence. First, the letter from my mother, and then everything I had uncovered. The truth of his manipulations, his lies. He tried to explain it away, to make excuses, but his words were hollow. Each excuse I countered with more facts, more proof. And with every word I spoke, his control slipped further from his grasp. I could feel the fury building within me, but it wasn't the rage of a child anymore. It was the strength of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. The room fell into silence as my father tried to regain control, but it was too late. Some of my siblings were looking at me differently now, no longer shielding him from the truth. Others, still too loyal to him, sat in stunned silence. It was clear that the family was divided, and there was no going back. Ruby's thoughts. They've been living in his shadow for so long, they don't know what it's like to stand on their own. They're scared, but I'm not scared anymore. Twist S4. Then, another surprise. My older sibling, the one who had always been the golden child, stepped forward. I suspected it for years. I didn't know how to confront it. I was too afraid to face it. The words were like a knife to my heart, but they also gave me strength. This wasn't just my battle anymore. It was our family's reckoning, and for the first time, I wasn't alone in it. The scales had tipped in my favor. My father's attempt to regain control was feeble. He tried one last time to manipulate the situation, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I had the truth, and it was undeniable. Ruby's voice was strong, unwavering. This is your legacy now. You can't hide from the truth anymore. You've lost. Twist S5. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage something, my father muttered an apology. But it was too late. The words were empty. The damage had been done. I had taken control, and I wasn't going to let him twist my emotions anymore. Cliffhanger line. I don't need your approval anymore. I'm done. It's over, and I'm free. The mansion felt colder tonight, the echo of every footstep heavy on the old wood floors. The storm outside roared, matching the turmoil inside. I could feel the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on me, each step through the halls a reminder of how far I had come and how much further I still had to go. The secrets that had been buried for years, the lies that had shackled us, were about to come crashing down. I had exposed the truth, but the real question was, what would happen next? Ruby's thoughts. I've done everything I can to fight for my truth. But what happens next? Is it enough to change what's already been broken? The house had witnessed too much, too many whispers, too many betrayals, and now it felt like a ticking time bomb. Each second passed, and the explosion drew nearer, but still, a part of me wondered if I could ever really escape the grip of the past. Could I truly rebuild everything I'd lost? Or was this just the beginning of an even darker journey? Twist S1. A sudden ping interrupted my thoughts. I checked my phone, and there it was, a cryptic message from a family member who had always stayed silent. It was from my older brother, someone who had rarely spoken up in the past. The message read, "There's more you don't know. You're not ready for the full truth." The words hit me like a slap. My heart raced, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. What had I missed? What was he trying to tell me? I had thought I had uncovered every secret, every betrayal, but now it seemed I had only scratched the surface. What could he possibly mean by the full truth? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I prepared for the final showdown. The evidence was spread out before me. Letters, recordings, documents, everything I needed to bring the house of lies crashing down. I could feel the tension mounting. This was the moment. Ruby's preparation. I've done the research. I've fought for this. I won't back down now. I gathered everything carefully, methodically. There was no room for mistakes. Each piece of evidence was a thread I had carefully unraveled, a story that would expose everything: my father's lies, his manipulations, and the devastating toll they had taken on all of us. But as I reached for the last document, something caught my eye. A letter, carefully hidden beneath the others. It was from my father, written years ago. Twist S2. The letter was like a bombshell waiting to explode. It revealed something I had never anticipated. My father had been involved in something far darker than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the lies, the infidelities, or the manipulation. It was something criminal. And I now had the proof. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just about family secrets anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. And I was the one who was going to expose it. As the evening wore on, I gathered my strength and entered the drawing room. The air was thick with tension. My father sat at the head of the table, his face pale and tense, but he refused to acknowledge the storm that was about to hit. My siblings sat in uneasy silence, unsure of where their loyalties lay. Ruby's voice was steady as she spoke, cutting through the quiet like a knife. "You've been hiding the truth for too long. It's over now. You can't manipulate me anymore. Not today. Not ever again. Twist S3. My father's facade crumbled, his face contorting with rage as he finally admitted what I already knew. The lies, the manipulation, they were all true. But as he spoke, I saw the familiar glint of control in his eyes. Even in his confession, he tried to twist the narrative, to make himself the victim. But I wasn't buying it, not anymore. Every word he said was another layer of his manipulation, another attempt to regain the power he had lost. And for the first time, I wasn't fooled. The tension in the room was palpable as my father's confession hung in the air. Some of my siblings seemed to soften, as if they were finally beginning to see the truth. But others, those who had always stood by him, remained quiet, defensive. Ruby's thoughts. They're scared. They've lived in his shadow for so long, they don't know how to stand on their own. But I'm not scared anymore. I won't let his lies control me. Twist S4. Then, in a surprising move, one of my siblings stepped forward. It was my younger brother. He had always been the one to avoid confrontation, but now, his voice trembled as he admitted, "I suspected it all along, but I was too afraid to speak up." The weight of his words hit me like a wave. For years, I had felt like the only one who saw through my father's mask, the only one who was brave enough to fight back. But now, I wasn't alone. The support I had longed for was finally here, and it gave me the strength to keep going. I stood there, looking my father in the eye. He was broken, but his guilt didn't bring the closure I had expected. It only made me feel more certain that I was done with him. There was nothing left to fix, no more apologies that could heal the wounds he'd created. Ruby's voice was calm, unwavering. "This is your legacy now. You can't hide from the truth anymore. You've lost." Twist S5. And just when I thought it was over, my father made one final attempt to manipulate me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't know how else to fix this. Please, you have to forgive me." His words were empty, his apology hollow. I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. Cliffhanger line. "I don't need your approval anymore. I'm done. It's over, and I'm free." The air was thick in the family estate, the house I had grown up in, a place that once felt like home, but now stood as a prison of lies. Outside, the storm raged, the sound of thunder booming in the distance, as if nature itself mirrored the chaos inside. It was late evening, and every second that passed seemed to make the tension heavier. Tonight, everything would change. Ruby's thoughts. "I've spent so long living in the shadow of their lies. Tonight, it all ends. Not with anger, but with the truth." I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I had seen myself in this mirror so many times before, but tonight was different. I wasn't the daughter craving approval, lost in the web of family deceit. Tonight, I was someone who had seen through the lies, someone ready to face the consequences of exposing the truth. The person I had become was unrecognizable, but in the best way possible. Twist S1. As I gathered the evidence for the final confrontation, I found one last document buried beneath the others. A final piece to the puzzle, proof that my father had been involved in something far darker than I had imagined. This was it. This was the truth that would bring everything to light. I felt a surge of power. Everything I had fought for, everything I had endured, was leading to this moment. There was no turning back now. The family gathered in the living room, and the room was thick with anticipation. My father sat there, his usual air of control slipping, but still trying to hold on. He couldn't fool me anymore. The lies he'd built his empire on were crumbling, and now it was time for the truth to surface. Ruby's voice was steady as she stood before him, calm but unyielding. "You've built your empire on lies, and now the truth is coming for you. You can't hide anymore." Twist S2. My father immediately began to deny everything, twisting the narrative as he always had. But this time, it wasn't working. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, a hidden recording that captured the full extent of his deceit. The silence in the room was deafening as the recording played, exposing him for the manipulator he truly was. The tension in the room was palpable. My father's desperation was clear, his attempts to regain control falling apart with each word. But for me, this wasn't just about exposing the truth. This was about reclaiming my power. The room erupted into chaos as my father's lies were laid bare. My siblings, who had long stood in his shadow, were now forced to confront the reality of what they had refused to see. Some were in disbelief, others in anger. But there was no going back. The truth had been exposed, and it was too late to undo it. Ruby's thoughts. I've spent my life in their shadow. But tonight, they see me, not the person they want me to be, the person I really am. Twist S3. And then, for the first time, my mother spoke. Her voice was soft, but her words hit harder than anything my father had said. I knew everything, but I was too afraid to speak up. Her confession shocked me, but it also gave me strength. My mother, for years silent, had finally spoken out, and in that moment, I realized how deep the manipulation had run, how much I had been kept in the dark. The emotional storm in the room intensified. Anger, betrayal, and disbelief filled the air, but it wasn't just the family that was in turmoil. I was torn too. But there was a clarity in the chaos, a realization that I couldn't let this consume me. I couldn't let them control me any longer. My father, desperate to maintain control, tried one last time to manipulate me. His voice trembled with emotion, but his eyes still held the same coldness they always had. You think this changes everything? We are family, Ruby. You can't just tear everything apart because of a few mistakes. Twist S4. But I wasn't fooled. I saw through him now. His manipulation, his guilt, it was all a game. A last-ditch effort to regain some of the control he had lost. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I shook my head. I'm done. I'm done trying to fix you. I'm not your savior, and I'm no longer a pawn in your game. The realization settled in my chest like a weight lifting. I didn't need to carry this anymore. I was free. In that final moment, with all the pieces of my life finally falling into place, I made my choice. There was no going back. I had been broken, but I was no longer the same person who had walked into this house all those years ago. The lies, the manipulations, they no longer had power over me. Ruby's final declaration was loud and clear. I'm not your pawn. I'm not your victim. And I'm certainly not going to keep enabling your lies. This ends now. Twist S5. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something else. Something unexpected. My mother handed me a letter. It was hers, written years ago. In it, she confessed her part in everything, the silence, the complicity, the fear that kept her from standing up. And she asked for my forgiveness. Cliffhanger line. This was never just about me, was it? But now, it's about how I rebuild my life, without you. The morning after the storm felt almost surreal. The house, once a symbol of family unity, now felt more like a monument to the broken past. As I walked through the halls, I could still feel the weight of the previous day's confrontation hanging in the air. The echoes of my father's broken words, the way the room had erupted, the truth finally exposed. It was all still so fresh. But now, it was over. Or so I thought. Ruby's inner dialogue. I've spent so much time being afraid of the truth, but now that it's out, there's nothing left to hold me back. It's time for me to decide who I want to be. I sat in a quiet corner of the mansion, taking a deep breath. There was a peace settling in my chest, but I knew it wasn't complete. The battle was done, but there was still the aftermath, and it wasn't going to be easy. Twist S1. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped before. I had freed myself from the prison of lies, but the emotional scars my father left behind were not so easily erased. Healing would take more than just severing ties. It was going to take time, time that I hadn't fully prepared for. It was one thing to expose the truth, but another to live with the consequences. And I knew now for sure that my real fight was just beginning. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, but no less painful. My siblings, those who had chosen to side with my father, were still reeling from what had happened. Some remained silent, their loyalty torn between the truth and the years of manipulation. Others couldn't look at me the same way. Some even lashed out, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Ruby's siblings' confrontation. "You think you've won? You've torn this family apart." My words were calm, though they hit harder than I intended. "I didn't tear this family apart. You did. You just didn't see it until now." Twist S2. The sibling who had once supported me, who had stood beside me when the truth came out, now turned their back. The weight of family loyalty and the truth was too much for them to bear. They were broken, just like the rest of us. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming, but as much as I wanted to cry, to scream, I couldn't. I had to stay strong. The price of standing up for myself had been steep, and I couldn't afford to lose my footing now. I spent hours reflecting, trying to come to terms with everything that had happened. My father's manipulation, my siblings' betrayal, the fracture in the family. I had hoped for closure, but all I had was this emptiness, this gaping wound. Still, I knew I couldn't go back. There was no going back. Ruby's thoughts on closure. I thought I needed them to love me. But now I realize I needed to love myself more. Twist S3. Just as I was beginning to embrace the reality of my decision, my mother, the quiet observer, did something that took me by surprise. She handed me a letter. It was one she had written years ago, before everything had spiraled out of control. She confessed her own role in the family's dysfunction and asked for my forgiveness. Her gesture, though silent, spoke volumes. It was her way of saying she understood, of acknowledging the damage my father had done. Her approval, though subtle, was everything I needed. It wasn't about her asking for forgiveness. It was about her finally seeing me, hearing me, and letting me go. With that, I knew it was time. It was time to step into the life I had always imagined for myself. I couldn't be the daughter of that man any longer. I was Ruby, the woman who had fought for her truth, and now it was time to fight for her future. Ruby's new path. This is my life now. I don't need anyone else's approval to live it. Twist S4. I made my move. I quit my job, packed up my things, and made plans to start over. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, toward my future, toward the woman I had always wanted to be. This was a bold move, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had control. I stepped out of the shadow of my family and into the light of my own future. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wondered if I had made the right choice, but in my heart, I knew I had. I was free. I was no longer bound by the lies or the expectations of others. The weight of my past didn't define me anymore. Ruby's final thoughts. The past is behind me. The future is what I make of it. I am the author of my own story now. Twist S5. As I looked ahead, there was a small piece of news that caught my attention. A story about a project I had always dreamed of starting. It was a small step, but it was full of promise. This was the beginning of something new. Cliffhanger line. I thought I'd be walking away from them, but I realized I was walking toward the person I was always meant to be.